Welcome to Big Bill's New York Pizza. Today we're here with, I can't remember either.
God, you know when you get old, you forget.
I know. Ron Zappolo. And we're on the, what's the name of this show?
I don't know.
Colorado SportsConnection.
I guarantee you're going to hear this. Barry Brown gave him that, and I'm amazed you're still wearing it.
I'm amazed it fits. I'm amazed it fits.
Hello everybody and welcome to Colorado Sports Connection. I'm your host Daryl Navarro and we're coming to you from Big Bill's New York Pizza in Centennial. Well, my guest today currently works for Fox News 31 and he first hit the Colorado airwaves back in 1977 working as a sportscaster. And let me tell you something, nobody brought you Colorado sports like my guest, Ron Zappolo.
You know, if I knew you were going to introduce me that well, I would have come here way before now. But you got to excuse me, Daryl. I just got a vision of Big Bill over there wearing a Charlotte Bobcats shirt. And the one thing about Bill, he and Doug Moe had one thing in common. They never wore anything they paid for. In other words, everything they wore was given to them by somebody else. And I'm glad to see years later Bill is still holding up that tradition.
What about this restaurant?
Well, first off, only because I love Bill do I come in here as often as I do, because everything I see is Yankee stuff. And there's no Red Sox stuff, and I live and die with the Red Sox, so this kind of hits me where I live. But you know what? I used to live out near here, and this is my wife's favorite place, and if something happens to me, she's going to end up with Bill. Honest to God, I'm not kidding. Like, I left today, and she goes, make sure you tell Bill I love him and to wait for me. So this is the kind of stuff I got to put up with, and I still come to his place.
Well, I tell you what, she could not end up in better hands
no,
than
she
Big
couldn't.
Bill.
If I have to go and she's got to be with somebody else, you know, God forbid, I'd just as soon it be with Bill.
Now, let me ask you something here. With Big Bill, anybody that comes in wearing a Boston Red Sox hat, and you're a big Boston fan, what about the grief he gives you?
Well, he gives me a lot of grief, but I try not to come in here with any Red Sox stuff, and I try not to look at the walls, or I look at, I look at Jordan, or I look at the millions of pictures with Doug, or anything else other than all the New York stuff. It's hard to do, but I mean, I try and do it.
You know, we're looking at all these pictures here, and here we are, Super Bowl weekend. And you've covered your share of Super Bowls.
I have. Yeah, 7 Super Bowls I've covered.
And of all the Super Bowls you've covered, because your first one was back in 1977.
Back when they went to New Orleans with it was the Broncos Cowboys.
And being that it's Super Bowl weekend, let's talk about the Super Bowls.
Okay.
Talk about your time with the Denver Broncos.
Covering all those Super Bowls?
Covering all those
First
stories.
off, I'm one of the few guys that's seen in person every Super Bowl the Broncos have played in. Now, I don't know if there's that many people in that group. I know Woody Page has. And there's probably some fans that have, but that's a pretty small group. And the interesting thing, if you go back to the '77 team, we went to New Orleans. The Super Bowl has changed so much in 35 years. We stayed at like a Holiday Inn. It was just cold water in the showers. The hotel was kind of a dump. And other people from the '77 team will back me up on this. It wasn't real pleasant. You know, it wasn't like it is now where it's 5-star hotels and parties and everything's just, through the roof good. The Super Bowl has changed from all those years. I remember the last one with the Broncos, the one down in Fort Lauderdale when they beat Atlanta. I mean, it was that night just party after party after party after party. And, we're doing our thing live from the hotel there, but it was just one party after another. And it's just... The Super Bowl has totally changed now. The game has become almost secondary to the week-long aura of you got to be here, you got to be there. It's just completely different. And in '77, there were probably, a few hundred members in the media. Now I think they got, 4,000 or 5,000 people that go to every Super Bowl.
Speaking of 1977, talk about how it was like here in Denver when the Broncos went to that
was
first
great.
Super Bowl.
There's nothing like it.
I don't think anything compares, even today, the fans.
Well, I mean, I get people, Daryl, ask me all the time, like, what's the greatest, moment you covered? And I've been fortunate. I've had so many. But that one ranks right there. I mean, I showed up the 1st of August that year, and 6 months later, we're in the Super Bowl. But that team, that group of guys going through that year, and I remember it vividly. Terry Fry wrote a great book about it about a year ago, and I was honored. He asked me to write the foreword and everything. That group of guys, that team, at that time, put Denver on the map like Denver had never been on the map before. And those guys were the first group of guys that, to show you how far back it goes, Those guys had to get like jobs in the off season to make ends meet. I mean, that's how different it was then. Those guys lived here year round. They were part of the community. Unfortunately, a lot of guys aren't with us anymore from that team. That's how long ago it's been. But that team, I think of Louis Wright, Billy Thompson, Rick Upchurch, Tom Jackson, Randy Gradishar. I think of the Orange Crush defense. I think of Red Miller. I think of people sending me all the orange stuff every day. That team, there's nothing like the first. And that team was the first. And I remember beating Pittsburgh and then beating Oakland 20-17 to go, and Rob Lytle getting through there, and John Madden still thinking he didn't make that he fumbled. Morton throwing that pass to Moses and dancing down the sidelines and cutting back, scoring a touchdown. I think Otis Armstrong getting the first down to clinch the game. I remember all that stuff. And I remember all the games. I remember kicking the hell out of Oakland up there in Oakland. You know, I remember beating Burt Jones down here with the Colts. Tom Jackson had a big interception. I remember all that stuff.
Oh, and what did you think about that Orange Crush defense? We've had Steve Foley on and Haven Moses,
right.
And they talked, you talked about the communication between the fans. They said it was so much closer back then.
The biggest change, I think, now, in sports in general, and just in sports, back then, 35 years ago, the fans and the athletes were much closer together, economically, socially, in every way. The players on any sport played in your town, lived in your town. You saw them at 7-Eleven. You might run into them in a restaurant. Today, the gap between the fans and the players has never been greater. The Denver Nuggets and the Denver Broncos can't relate to John Q. Public. They're making way too much money. They don't have part-time jobs. They live in other places. They come in, do their thing, and they go. It's a complete... Listen, Carmelo Anthony right now has no real connection to the Denver fan. I'm not picking on him. I'm just throwing a name out there. Where in 1977, Dan Issel had a strong connection, a very strong connection. He wasn't economically so far removed. And that's the biggest difference. Those guys in 77, they were part of the fabric of the community. And that defense, I can still remember it. We can go down the list. Gradishar, Jackson, Swenson, and Rizzo were the backers. Rob Nairn backed them up. Larry Evans backed them up. You had Barney Chavis, Lyle Alzado, and Reuben Carter with the 3 and the 3-4. You had John Grant, Bryson Manor behind them. Whom I forget? Paul Smith, late Paul Smith. You had in the backfield, you had Foley, Louis Wright, Bernard Jackson. You had Randy Podol, Bernard. You had all these guys that was just a great defense.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, what I want to talk to you about then are the Denver Broncos coaches, because you definitely had your time with them.
Sure.
We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue our talk with Ron Zappolo right here on Colorado Sports Connection.